Hello and welcome to A Short Introduction to Japanese Time Periods, Part 1. Please keep in mind that for a few of these time periods, there are still some debates on when they begin or end, so you might see some differences between the dates I mention here and some other sources. We'll be covering the beginnings of Japan until just before the early modern era. If we start at the beginning, the land that would become Japan started to form 450 million years ago, with the island process beginning 20 million years ago. Japan fully became an island around 10,000 years ago, when the last land bridge to the Eurasian continent in the north disappeared. That's if you ask a geologist. If you ask the Shinto religion, which is the native religion of Japan, the first island was created with a drop from the sacred spear used to mix the primordial sea of early existence by the male kami Izanagi and the female kami Izanami. The rest of the islands and various other lesser kami deities formed from the marriage and union of the two after they descended from the heavens to the first island. As for the human era, the Paleolithic period in Japan begins about 39,000 years ago, when humans first arrived in Japan. There are two main theories on how these first humans arrived, either through the northern land bridge, where Japan was still connected to the continent, or through the southern Ryukyu Islands by boat. There's a second major migration from the Korean peninsula that we'll talk about later. However they arrived, these first humans would be called the Jomon people. The Jomon were a mostly hunter-gatherer society, although there is evidence in some areas that they managed their resources and did some casual cultivation of things like gourds. This is possible because while most hunter-gatherers were nomadic, the Jomon were unique in that in many areas they were sedentary, meaning they stayed in one place. The Jomon people are most known for their pottery today, which is one of the main ways we separate the 6 sub-periods of the Jomon. Incipient Jomon era begins 14 to 11,000 BCE, and the end of the final Jomon era is about 500 BCE. Jomon pottery is known for its chord patterns and increasingly intricate designs through the years. The beginnings of the second major migration to Japan was from about 500 to 300 BCE, marking the start of the Yayoi period. This time, it was people of the Eurasian continent coming from the Korean peninsula. There are 3 sub-periods, again mostly determined by pottery styles, but with the beginning and end dates for all of them still debated. In general, the immigrant Yayoi people would have first lived alongside the native Jomon people, mixing with them over time and eventually replacing them in most places. The Yayoi people brought agricultural practices, mainly rice farming, and the use of bronze and iron. With the shift to agriculture, villages formed and later developed into chiefdoms and semi-states. Due to this, the time period had a lot of conflict, which we know about through Korean and Chinese sources, since there weren't yet written Japanese records at this time. They are also known for their use of bells in ritual practices, with bigger and more elaborate designs over time, to the point they were no longer able to be used as actual bells. The next time period, the Kofun era, begins about 300 CE and is named for the burial mound tombs for rulers, particularly the keyhole-shaped ones, which became popular at the time. It consists of 3 to 5 sub-periods, depending on if you include the Asuka and Hakuho eras, and is sometimes also called the Yamato period. Haniwa, clay figurines, are another staple from the time period that were found in Kofun. Writing also starts to be seen, and the period is a major point for Buddhist history in Japan, as it is when Buddhism arrived and later became particularly popular through Prince Shotoku, who was a devout believer himself. The Kofun period ends as Kofun stopped being built with the Taika reform, and the Nara period officially begins in 710 CE with the movement of the imperial capital to Heijokyo, present-day Nara. With the intention of being permanent, it was designed after the Chinese Tang Dynasty capital of Chang'an and was the first truly urban center in Japan. Before this, the capital would move with every new emperor due to Shinto beliefs regarding death and impurity, along with other political factors. Japan's first national histories were written in this period, in 712 and 720 CE. The first of the two, the Kojiki, is particularly important to the Shinto religion because it details the creation myth for Japan and several other stories, including the imperial line's divine descent from Amaterasu. The second, the Nihongi, is more detailed and considered to rather accurately track several of the emperors and their reigns up to then. Buddhism also continues to spread and mix with Shinto beliefs in this time period. The Nara period is considered the beginning of the classical era of Japanese history, where art and culture developed and flourished, especially among the upper class. The classical era continues with the Heian period in 794, which begins once more with the movement of the capital, this time to present-day Kyoto, called Heian at the time. The emperor did this for geopolitical reasons, to try to strengthen his authority. However, the powerful Fujiwara family still manages to gain increasing control in the political and imperial realms. They and other aristocratic families, along with Shoin landholders, gain power and begin to build militaries to protect that power, leading to a military class forming called the Bushi. The big three families of the time were the Fujiwara, Taira, and the Minamoto. During this time period, as art and culture continue to flourish among the elites, the native Japanese alphabet systems, called kana, also begin to develop. The world's first novel, The Tale of Genji, is then written in Japanese by the noblewoman Murasaki Shikibu. Yet despite the thriving art scene, the imperial court continued to lose power over time, and conflict grows among the major families with their increasing military power. Eventually, fighting over imperial succession happens, putting the Taira in power, but because they aren't very good at governing, Minamoto Yoritomo takes power in the Genpei War. The end of the Genpei War in 1185 marks the start of the medieval era of Japan, as Minamoto Yoritomo has the emperor give him the title of shogun, and he establishes a bakufu, or tent government, in Kamakura, since that is where he was from. The bakufu, or shogunate system, meant that the Bushi military class had civil, military, and judicial power, while the emperor mostly became a ceremonial figurehead with little power. It mostly fits the feudal model. This was another important period for Buddhism in Japan, as the Pure Land and Zen forms of Buddhism were established during this time. Pure Land Buddhism was popular with the general populace, while Zen Buddhism was popular among the military class. An important literary work from the time was the Tale of the Heike, which recorded stories from the Genpei War. While powerful, the Kamakura government never achieved full control since the Fujiwara family in the north still resisted, and when Yoritomo died, even the shogun eventually became a figurehead. The Mongol invasions also happened in this period, and while the tales of the divine winds that drove off the Mongols reestablished and strengthened the Shinto religion, it put a lot of strain on the Bakufu government due to defense costs and an inability to pay the warriors who had fought. This and other factors led to a series of civil wars between the emperor and the Bakufu, with Ashikaga Takuuji eventually taking over as the first Ashikaga shogun. The wars didn't end until 1392, though, under the third Ashikaga shogun, Yoshimitsu, when he reunified the fractured imperial courts and marked the start of the Muromachi period, named for the district in Kyoto where the Ashikaga headquarters were. Under Yoshimitsu, there was renewed contact and trade with Ming Dynasty China, which aided in the development of a new national culture called Muromachi culture. It meant art of all kinds once again flourished, including architecture, literature, drama, tea ceremony, etc., with Zen influence in particular being strong. This flourishing of art and culture would last through the Sengoku era. Even under Yoshimitsu, the Bakufu government was still weak, and after Yoshimitsu, the shoguns gradually lost power to regional rulers called daimyo, who emerged and gained power at this time. Eventually, there were succession issues among the Ashikaga, leading to the Onin War from 1467 to 77. The Onin War is generally considered the start of an era called the Sengoku, or Warring States period. It was a time of great conflict, with many civil wars breaking out between various daimyo, lasting even beyond the end of the Muromachi period until 1600. With that, we'll end part 1 of a short introduction to Japanese time periods. Thank you for watching.